poppin', everybody? Welcome to the Convince Me podcast. We are, of course, Darren and Ryan, and we are here on a mission to convince you to step out of your gaming comfort zone and try something new. So let's get to convincing. As you may or may not recall, last week I was going to be playing and convincing Ryan today about the Dungeons of Hinterburg by Microbird Games. Ryan was to be playing Neon White by Angel Matrix.
Fun
Ryan,
fact.
did you get much time to play this week?
Yes, I did.
Oh, good.
I managed to squeeze a decent amount of time in. This week was crazy because at my school it was Valentine's Day, so there was a lot of build up to that, and things with the wife and everything. However, I did get a decent amount of time in, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I want to talk about something I noticed about these developers in just a little bit. But first, what's new in our lives, Darren? Anything crazy happened in the past week?
Oh
I don't know
man,
if you're going to be able to top that car story, man. I'm not going to lie to you.
I not in the same way, but different ways. When we are recording this, we're just finishing the end of the full moon week. And I previously have had no affinities nor I guess superstitions regarding the full moon and their effects on people, but man, let me tell you, I don't know what happened, but Florida was Floridaing so hard in this last week. I just the interactions with people, some of the most irrational, nonsensical things. Like I can't even
In
everybody.
Florida?
Everybody, oh, I know, believe it or not.
No
But for
way.
me to be saying that after living here for almost 10 years,
Something
it
happened.
was it was extra Florida. It's like you Florida with like a little sprinkle of extra Florida.
Oh,
And
you
man,
never
let
do
me
that.
let me tell you, like it's
You
like
don't go full Florida.
you got slapped in the face with a gator tail while somebody naked on meth ran down the street. Like it was craziness, the level of Florida that existed this week. But I mean, yeah, it's over. Thank goodness. I'm currently on day 13 of working the last 13 days in a row. So I am what some may call brain fried, and we'll let the delirium sink in. You know,
The full moon
here
is
we are.
100% a thing.
It's gotta be.
As an educator, there's just something where when the full moon happens, like I'll have a day of classes and it'll just be insane. I'll have students going off the deep end, just doing things that leave me speechless. And then I drive home and I'm looking up and I see the moon and I'm just like, oh, I see it now. It's a thing. It's 100% a thing. Do you have anything in particular, though?
Oh man, I. It's just kind of the cumulative total of it all. I mean, so it's not. This wasn't so much fun, but I mean, my week really started Tuesday. Um, I it was about 6 p.m. The place I work, we're open a bit after that. Um, Not a ton going on, only a couple people around. And this lady runs into the office and looks around and says, "Do any of you know CPR and do you guys have an AED?"
Stop it.
Which, like, you love to have silence absolutely broken by someone frantically running in asking those questions. So me and the other doc I was working with, we look at each other physically and we run outside and here's this guy who he and his wife were just gonna go do some grocery shopping at Aldi, no big deal. And he trips, stumbles backwards, and cracks his head open on the blacktop right in front of the handicap parking spot. And so there's this group of like three people around him. Fortunately, the guy was awake and aware, and he was more embarrassed than anything. But I mean, it's just when that's how your week starts,
Wait, he was embarrassed that he's
that he fell
there,
and caused a
sitting
ruckus,
there, head
sitting
open, just
back
like,
of his head bleeding on a reusable grocery bag. Yeah,
oh my gosh, I'm
absolutely.
so embarrassed. That would be the last thing on my mind.
Well, I mean,
That's
yeah,
I've never
yeah,
been there,
and I
so
mean his wife was very calm. She definitely was a rock. You kind of tell things like this have happened before. I mean, I was definitely around an advanced aged population, but I mean, just there's something about it. Like you get all your training put to use, but then all when it all really comes necessary, fortunately we didn't need it, but just to have to transition mentally into that frame of thought, it took a pretty substantial toll, especially because I'd already been working, 8 days in a
Yeah.
row prior. So I mean, it's just it
But
just kind of unraveled for the rest of the week from there.
golly day. Well, the story that I had to tell, I'm just like, all right, I might as well not even tell it at this point.
I mean, you should have gone first, but that's fine. Now we know.
You didn't warn me. You didn't just sit
Of
there and go,
course
you
not.
know what? I saved a life. No, you didn't. Like, of
I
course,
didn't
I'm
do
not going to do
anything. He
that.
was he was fine. We didn't have to actually do anything. EMS showed up, all is well. Guy was fine, but I mean, just I couldn't tell you. Then I would miss your authentic reaction to what has been just a transcendent week. Let me tell you.
I watched a guy get absolutely no. My story is very very tame in comparison because once again it ties into what a student asked me. And you think after 9 years in this profession, I just kind of become numb to the things that students say.
Do
I'm
you
I'm
ever?
not.
I don't
I'm
think you ever
not.
can be. You're a
And
parent too. That doesn't change.
bro, but it's golly day. You threw me off. But
Well, now I'm trying
I
to throw you back on.
this
Continue.
is this is pre Super Bowl. By the way, go Birds. And I support my team. Eagles fan, have been my whole life, always will be. Darren can attest. No bandwagon in my family. It is Eagles. It's Philly everything, right?
Heard
So,
that.
a few days before the weekend, I'm supporting my team. And I'm wearing either I have a Brandon Graham jersey or Saquon Barkley. For those who don't know, two very, very good Eagles players. And I was wearing the jersey, and all day people were like, Eagles are going to lose. Eagles are going to lose. Chiefs are going to beat them. Eagles suck. And I'm like, all right, man. I don't initiate trash talk. But if you talk trash to me, I'm going to talk back. But I had a student in one of my classes, once again, when they're doing book checkout, ask me a question, and I wasn't sure what to say. He looked at me, and it wasn't the first time. I'd been asked multiple times, but I never knew how to answer without being sarcastic. They look at me in my Eagles jersey with the Eagles logo on the side. It is very clearly an eagle, green, says Eagles on it, and they go, Mr. White, do you want the Chiefs or the Eagles to win? And I don't know how to answer that without coming across as sarcastic and mean. So because students don't really understand sarcasm at that age, I have to just go, I'm hoping the Eagles win. But in the back of my mind, I'm just firing off all these sarcastic things I want to say, but I'm not allowed to. Because, I don't want to hurt a kid's feelings because they're being genuinely curious. I encourage curiosity in my library, but there also comes a point where you have to connect the dots, you know?
You know exactly what I would have done.
Do tell.
I wouldn't have said a word. That's one of those.
I think I did to one of the fifth graders because I think they were just trying to be smart Alex about it, which, uh, but yeah, I'm just like, guys, come on now.
You know, perhaps we haven't quite gotten to the context clues part of their education yet. But
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe.
Speaking of being unawares or not being able to make an inference or connect the dots, if you will, we're going to go to our news headline. And I only want to
Oh
do
God.
one today because it's a doozy. It comes from DualShockers, and the Ubisoft CEO made a statement. Now, for those who don't know, Ubisoft is a company that makes a lot of open world games that are very, very similar. Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, are like the big two. They make a bunch of others, but those are like the flagship franchises that Ubisoft is kind of known for. There's also Ghost Recon and things like that. But I feel like your average person is really aware of mainly Assassin's Creed from them.
Didn't they do the Division as well?
Yes,
Am I making that
Division,
up? Okay.
that was that was Ubisoft. But Ubisoft is known for making open worlds where it almost comes across as a checklist. It started with Far Cry 3, really. And Far Cry 3 was a game where you were stranded on an island after trying to hang out with friends, and then you had to go around and capture towers and essentially save your friends on the island. And it's a very, very good game. And it started this trend of open world games where you went around and you had to find radio towers or buildings or skyscrapers or whatever, and that you had to capture the outpost to unlock a part of the map, like activities at that part of the map. It was very unique for the time when Far Cry 3 came out. Assassin's Creed kind of followed suit. And that is really the open world formula that Ubisoft created, and they've done the same thing ever since, just making the worlds bigger and filling them with, like I said, checklist activities. So, Ubisoft CEO says they plan on doing live service games and open world games year after year, and they don't plan on stopping. Now, there's a part 2. There was another article. According to gamesindustry.biz, their revenue has declined 34.8%. Do you think these things are related?
I mean, without having my feet in the industry, I obviously can't speak in definitives. Um, but that's a hard stat to ignore. I mean, I feel like pretty I would say pretty consistently. I don't think this is outlandish to say. Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Assassin's Creed Origins, Assassin's Creed Odyssey all did pretty well.
I don't know.
Assassin's Creed Valhalla just feels like the game started and I never heard anybody speak about it.
I think the issue for their games is because apparently the CEO wants to continue going this way. When I played Valhalla, I never finished it
Me neither.
because I put a lot of time into it. I put a few dozen hours into it, a lot of time, and felt like I was running in place the whole time because whenever I did one landmark interesting point or point of interest or whatever, it felt like 5 more popped up. And I'm the kind of person where there will probably reach a point where I don't care about side content if it's not holding my interest. Perfect example of a game that did was Metaphor. ReFantasio. Great game. I did everything that game had to offer. Every side quest, every possible relationship build. I did everything possible in that game other than like maximizing archetypes, which is just a matter of grinding. But the side content was fun for me, so I did it, and I spent lots of hours in that game. Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla, they didn't do that. Not for me, at least. I,
Origins and Odyssey did for me, but I found myself reaching the same point with both of those games. Valhalla, I probably put 10 to 12 hours into, and really what happened is I just feel like I got fatigued from it all. Like it became a point where the game itself felt like a chore.
it does.
And that's the complete opposite of what a game should be. Now, what is interesting is that to just broadly state, we are going to continue making open world games year after year. Okay. That open world simply implies the way that you interact with the world. It doesn't necessarily say definitively they're going to stick with their formula. And the interesting part of that is if they decide to go the live service route, then I almost wonder if we start to see more games like The Division where perhaps they just put seasons of content into like the Dark Zone, or with Assassin's Creed, like they just introduce encounters that can only occur seasonally in certain places. I mean, there's directions they can go to try to dig themselves out of the monotonous doldrums that really all of their franchises have become. Far Cry has a lot of potential for that as well. So I mean, it's I think what we're seeing is the product of what Ubisoft has done, not simply the result of a statement made.
The
However, they have not put out any more content to try to dig that number out. So I maybe Assassin's Creed Shadows is going to be really good. I hope it is. It's the setting I've waited for in an Assassin's Creed game since I started playing Assassin's Creed. So I mean, fantastic. But this might be a topic for another time. But is it going to even be any different than Sekiro? I mean, we could go on for what. I don't know. I don't know what
yeah,
Ubisoft is implying there, or at least from the CEO. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, it can't be. We can't make too many assumptions. It's hard to say that these two things are connected, but it's we can't really say they're not either.
yeah,
But
that's fair.
before we keep going and going off the rails, because man, you and I have talked about Assassin's Creed for a long time, and we know how these conversations go. But in mentioning the divisions, I wanted, or in the division, I wanted to come to our question of the week. And Ryan, if you could revive any IP across any generation, any platform, what would it be? I want to set a preface here, strictly because we didn't necessarily do this when we came up with this earlier. Um, I want to say that that IP has to truly be out of the picture for at least a generation of consoles. Uh huh.
It's a
And
tough.
I knew it was gonna get you too, but I had to do it because we
So
have to. We don't know that anything that came out last gen is truly dead.
so it would have to have first come out. If I did this gen, it would have to have first come out, or the last game for it would have had to come out PS3 or 360
Or the Wii.
or Wii. You talk about your answer. Let me give it some thought. Let me
Sure.
really, really give it some thought. I think I know
Okay.
yours.
Do you humor me? Just
Is
keep it short.
yours Golden Sun?
It really is. It is absolutely, definitively, and
Yeah.
demonstrably Golden Sun. For those of you who've never played Golden Sun, so they were RPGs that came out back for the Game Boy Advance. And for me, I actually played Golden Sun: The Lost Age, which was Golden Sun 2 before I played the first one. Um so I that was the game that made me want a Game Boy Advance. And as soon as I got a Game Boy Advance, I probably played Golden Sun: The Lost Age 4 times, all almost in succession, because for me that was the first game where the puzzles truly took advantage of the hardware. You know, it was the first handheld that we had that really had an L and R buttons, Game Gear excluded, of course. Um, and just the way that you could interact with the world, the puzzle solving mechanics, the way that you could equip the genie as summons to then get stronger summons, the way that affinities with the elements all worked. I honestly think that that game was a borderline masterpiece, to the point where those of you who are familiar with the series know that people have been asking the Super Smash Brothers series to put any Golden Sun character, Isaac would be the main one, as a usable character, and instead we ended up getting Isaac as a trophy summon, which was really upsetting. But
You were
I
so
mean, he would
excited.
probably I was it would probably still just be a generic sword user, but it's
Because here's the thing.
those games were so
There
good.
there have been so many times that we've gotten notifications that something Golden Sun related has been trademarked. And I think that's the confusing part. And I think what it ended up being, I think, was Smash. But you're sitting there like, do something with it. do something with it. You
It's
know?
such a shame because it's for those of you who've never, if you have the ability to play Game Boy Advance games, go back and play the first and second Golden Sun games. The third one was okay, but the first and second, even the way that back then on a Game Boy Advance, they had a means of transferring save data so that your protagonists from the first game and their gear would exist again in that same exact capacity in the second game. That was unheard of in handheld gaming back in, gosh, what would have been 2002, 2003, somewhere in that ballpark. So we're talking almost 25 years of not having any Golden Sun content because again, that we're going to take that third one, we're going to set it over to the side. It was fine, but it didn't do the same things.
Yeah, I think Zelda would have done something similar, but I think no, I think that would have been GameCube time. I don't I don't know. I never my next door neighbor and like really best friend at that time had Four Swords, which was a game you could play on the GameCube through the Game Boy Advance. I don't remember. I think we did it one time and then never touched it again. But mine is interesting. Here's my question. Does it count if there was a remake on this generation, but the company has pretty much said that they don't plan on making like a new one? They've pretty much confirmed that they have no intentions of making a new one, even though a remake just came out for this gen. Yes, this
I'm
gen.
gonna I'm gonna say no because a remake, if it's what I think it is, a remake did legitimately just come out.
But the
So they're at
company has
least still
said,
trying to harvest the
all
IP
right, fine.
still.
It was going to be Dead Space. But
Uh-huh.
you know what comes into my mind? This one,
Hmm.
this one, you're gonna, it's gonna shock some neurons in your brain. Asura's Wrath. What if we just got a god slayer simulator? You know, a quick time event button mashing god slayer simulator. What's wrong with having a nice power trip and going and killing a god? What's wrong with that?
You, you could just play God of War.
Not the same, and you know it's not.
That's
Asura's
true.
Wrath takes it to a whole other tier. For those who don't know,
It's true.
Asura's Wrath was a PS3 game that came out and was essentially you were tasked with doing quick time events and fighting gods. That was the point of the game. And it was so flashy and so cool. The scale was gigantic. And it was just cool. That's the word for it. And nothing has happened since its release on PS3. Nothing's been announced, I don't think. You haven't heard hide nor tail. Like, I think that would be so much fun on modern hardware because it makes me think of Final Fantasy 16. Final Fantasy 16 scale was so grandiose and awesome. I loved it.
Hmm.
And we could talk about 16 for forever, but
I do have honorable mentions.
what are your honorable
Honorable
mentions?
mentions. So, honorable mentions for things that I considered
Mm-hmm.
classic JRPGs. Final Fantasy Tactics. Um, oh gosh, my brain just lost its mind for a second. Dark Cloud.
Oh, Dark Cloud.
Dark
Nice.
Cloud, absolutely phenomenal.
What about
I'd
Rogue
love a
Galaxy?
spiritual successor to Lost Odyssey,
Oh,
as well as Infinite Undiscovery, which I'm honestly surprised you didn't guess that I was going to go with, but those were standalone titles. And just for the meme, I'd love to see them make a new Lair game.
you love Lair. You love
Which
the
is so funny
idea.
because I never owned it, but I do love the idea. Can you imagine them slapping Lair into PSVR?
For those who don't know, Lair was a very incredibly poorly received launch title with the PS3 that used its
Six axis.
gyroscope 6-axis motion control thing with the controller, and it was so poorly received, and it kind of became a meme in the community. And anytime we talk about state of plays or when new games are going to be announced, we're like, there it is. It's going to be a new layer for PS6. It's happening. We're getting it.
Hmm.
But no,
It could have been good. It could be fun. So no honorable mentions, definitely. I
a
think there's a lot of potential with those franchises. And
layer.
to be fair, we may get a somewhat spiritual successor to Lost Odyssey in Clair Obscur.
Oh,
We may see something. You can make an argument that Star Ocean is effectively Infinite Undiscovery because it was still just a Square Enix and Tri-Ace game. So the styles were similar, but it was still different. And I,
your
you know,
your joke about layer reminded me of one that I think might
Legend of
actually
Dragoon.
that'd be cool. But no, Dragon Guard. The last Dragon Guard was PS3. And
Was
it
Dragon Guard 3 on PS3? Are you sure?
yes. You
Huh.
know why I always thought it was PS4? Because when you pull up the box, it says
Mm-hmm.
PS3, but I believe it's a blue banner, which was the
Mm-hmm.
PS4's color.
Mm-hmm.
But it's PS3.
Hmm.
So I don't know. There are tons.
Never write Yoko Taro out though.
That's fair. That's fair. And speaking of games that we would love to play,
Mm.
let's talk about our games for the week. It is now time to convince each other to try the games we played. And I mentioned earlier that I noticed something about the games that we chose.
Mm-hmm.
Both of the games that we chose, Dungeons of Hinterburg and Neon White, are the developers' first games. So Dungeons of Hinterburg is Microbird Games' first game. Neon White is Angel Matrix's first game. So I found that very interesting that last week we both chose games that were leaving Game Pass at the same time. And this week we've both chosen games who are first attempts by the developers of the week. So I will begin with Neon White by Angel Matrix. And I have a lot to say because I was so taken aback when I started playing this game. Neon White is a first-person shooter, puzzle, platformer, quick speedrun game. And it is very interesting because it has a card system in it. So the basic function of the game is, or let's start with the premise. You are a neon, which is a sinner who's been sent to hell. Angels from heaven call up neons to compete in a tournament for a spot in heaven. What they don't tell you until you complete the first series of missions is that you only get to be there in heaven for a year, then the following year it happens again. And what I didn't expect in this game was humor, visual novelization, and fourth wall breaking. I did not expect this game to be voice acted, visual novel, funny. I didn't expect that. I wasn't sure what I did, but as I started playing more and more, there's an intrigue that started opening up and made me go, I want to learn more about these people. So every neon is a color. You are playing Neon White. So as you're playing, everybody refers to you as White or Mr. White, and it was very off-putting for me because
Fair.
I'm just like, wait, did I put my... No, he's just White because that's his name. Then you have Neon Red and Neon Yellow and Neon Orange. You have a bunch of different colors, and as you go through the game, you can actually build bonds with these characters in this first-person shooter puzzle platformer by getting them gifts, which you get from completing the levels. So how the game works is you start a level, and you begin moving, and you hit L1, or left bumper, to jump, and then you hit left trigger to initiate a special ability of whatever cards you pick up. R2 is how you attack with the card. So each card is either like a submachine gun, a shotgun, a rifle, or whatever. And as you fire it, your card's ammo, or the gun's ammo, depletes. And if it goes away, you can't use its special ability. The special abilities are called discard abilities because when you use them, that card immediately vanishes. And so your job is to speed run through these levels and manipulating your jump and your special abilities of the cards to make your way through the level as quickly as possible. If you do it within a certain time, you get a medal based on your speed. So ace is the best, then gold, then silver, then bronze, and then not at all. And when you get gold or ace, which is essentially like the platinum, you increase your rank, and you have to get to certain ranks to continue the story. So you essentially are required to get a certain amount of golds or aces as you're doing these levels. Now you may think that sounds really annoying, but if you mess up, you can hit the options button or the back button on an Xbox controller and it immediately restarts the level. I'm talking less than a second to re-begin the level. So you're encouraged to experiment, find out what cards you're given, and figure out what the best optimal path is, and doing all these things to move through the level. Now, some of the abilities they're very varied, and I felt like at any point I could get overwhelmed. I felt at any point I'm just like, am I going to hit R2? Because there's 3 shoulder buttons at the point that I got to that mattered. Shoot the gun, discard ability, jump, right? And that's all triggers. And what I noticed up to the point I got to is that unless you were trying to do something specific, like get a collectible or find another route, the cards you were given were pretty much always used in the order that you were given them in. So some of your abilities are a dash straight ahead, a stomp on the ground, a fireball ability that lets you look in a direction and shoot in that direction and damage enemies at the same time. You get a double jump as one of your cards. And so I'm sitting here thinking there are a lot of abilities here and I don't know how I'm going to keep track of them all. But like I said, you acquire them in the level as you need them. And that made it so that all I had to focus on was pretty much the shoulder buttons. And R1 lets you switch between the cards you have equipped because you can only have 2 special cards at a time. So I actually found myself wanting to replay these levels to get the collectibles. And for those who don't know me, which is pretty much everybody, Darren knows this about me. I don't normally care about doing stuff like that. I don't normally care about getting collectibles or 100%ing. I play a game because I'm having fun. If I happen to have fun completing it, I'll do it. Perfect example, Resident Evil 8. I beat that game 7 times because it encouraged it, but I also had fun doing it. And so this game made me want to replay levels. I found optimal paths. I found myself kind of striving for the highest medal, the ace medal, if I was close enough. Because the game's snappy, it's quick, it rewards you trying multiple times so you can find a multiple path. Now, as you go through these levels, you have to kill a certain amount of demons. That's what you're doing. Your job to do well in this tournament is to slay demons. And that's what you're doing in the levels, and you can't complete the level until they're all slayed. Now, there may be a mode later where it's just about pure speed, but you can't skip levels when you first play them because you have to kill everything. But even with that, I was having so much fun doing it, and it has a pretty stereotypical story. And I, just like the gameplay, found myself wanting to do it more. And the story is that you are Neon White, and you are one of the neons, the sinners, and you're participating in this tournament, but the other neons seem to know you. You don't know anything. It's typical amnesiac, you forget everything before you died story, but some of the characters talk to you as though you knew each other before you died, and your character's just like, why do you know me? How do you know who I am? And they're dropping little hints like, oh, I knew this before you died, or we don't need to talk about that one thing that happened that one time, but it's not done in your typical visual novel way where it feels shoehorned in just to create mystery. The way the dialogue's written is very natural and excellent, especially for a first attempt. A few things that stood out to me as far as meta humor and just moments that made me laugh is one of the parts of the game you meet Neon Green, who's this big scary dude who seems to be staring at you, and one of the neons is talking to you and is like, dude, you can't beat him. And he's like, oh, well, all I do is I would kick out his legs from under them, then I'd unsheath my katana, and then she cuts him off, and she goes, are you doing a D&D thing right now? Basically implying that this dude's D&D role-playing a fantasy of beating this guy up. And I was taken as surprise. I was like, that's genuinely funny dialogue between them. And there was a moment where you could get tickets of Heavenly Delight if you reach certain levels of rank, and it unlocks different dialogue and cutscenes. And one of the cutscenes is you're going to karaoke, and one of the characters sings, and the Neon White says something about their song choice, and they're like, oh, like, you have great song choice. And he's like, oh yeah, watch this. And he goes, 1, 2, 3, 4. The world is a vampire. Just starts singing. So, like, this is genuinely funny stuff and made me want to keep going and seeing this funny dialogue with these characters. And, like, the angels, because biblically, we can't comprehend angels. Like, our brain just can't. And so, in this game, the angels appear to different things as different people. But for Neon White, they appear as cartoon cats sitting on a cloud. So all of the angels are different style cats sitting on clouds. And so it was just it's a fantastic time. And the cool thing is that because of the gameplay, you don't really need to sit down and dedicate a ton of time because it's about speed running. It just also happens to have a really good story, and so far it's a really simple story that doesn't require remembering tons of lore and all this other stuff that you can forget when you get away from a game for a long period of time. So I do think you'd enjoy it because you like FPSs, you like first person shooters, and it's very skill-based, and I know that you, like me, tend to enjoy games that require some semblance of skill, and it does with its control scheme. And, yeah, I mean, I think it's a great time.
Hmm. That's not at all what I expected that game to be about based on its cover art.
I know! I didn't either. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't what it was.
Fair enough.
Do you think
Okay.
that it's something that you'd be willing to try?
I mean, it's definitely worth some time. I
It
do
is.
enjoy any game that is willing to be humorous in a self-aware way.
Very
I mean, if we can
self-aware.
recall back to last week talking about another Crab's Treasure,
Mm.
I love self-aware humor. It's phenomenal. So it does. I mean, at least if nothing else, if the writing is good, even if the gameplay is passable, good writing will carry a story, which is great.
Yeah,
So interesting.
dialogue snappy, quick. I tend to get turned off if I'm playing a game that has I don't mind a lot of dialogue. I beat Persona
Mhm.
5, Royal, and Metaphor, and Persona 3. I've beaten those. And so I don't mind a lot of dialogue. What I get turned off by is when it's tons of dialogue at once.
Yes.
But this game doesn't do that. You may have 3 or 4 sentences at a time, maybe, in a dialogue box. It's real snappy, real quick, real great. So I think you should give it a try, and it sounds like you just might.
I just might.
All right,
But okay.
that's what we can hope for. What do you got
Okay.
for me?
So Ryan,
Yeah,
how do
that's
you
me.
feel about the concept of an isekai?
Can you do me a favor and explain to the glorious audience
I
what
I
is
would
that?
love to. So, for those unaware or those who don't watch anime, uh, the isekai genre is the concept of the hero teleported to another world, usually coming from the human world to something much more fantastical. Examples would include That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, which is a fantastic show if nobody has seen it. But in this case, how do you feel?
I have watched a fair share. I am not an isekai freak. Like that's not my main genre of choice, but I've partaken in some, and I like the idea of that, of starting over and getting. I like the idea of getting tremendous powers while being transported to another world. That's kind of my thing. But yeah, I love the idea of that, especially playing one. Why do you ask?
How would you feel if there was somewhere in our world that was completely technologically shut off from everywhere else, where dungeons opened up and you could basically experience an isekai as a vacation?
Vacation. Wait.
Vacation.
I like the idea of a vacation.
So, Dungeons of Hinterburg actually takes place in Austria, I
Okay.
believe. And there is the village of Hinterburg where dungeons have just magically opened up one day and magic is introduced to the area. As a downfall, though, there is no longer any internet nor cell signal.
I'm
However, it
out.
has become a destination for people to go on vacation to explore the dungeons because it is also the only place inside of those dungeons and those areas they're in where they're able to use magic as just regular people. So our main character seems to work in a law firm and she just feels like she's stuck in a rut. So she goes to Hinterburg to try to conquer some dungeons to feel a bit more alive.
So,
Her first. Oh, go ahead.
is she going to another world to do
No.
so, or
She's going
each
to
dungeon
Austria.
is each dungeon its own
So there are
thing?
subsections of the wilds around Hinterburg. Each one of the subsections contains multiple dungeons that you can explore.
Mm, okay.
However, as the game starts, you go through the tutorial dungeon, which of course all first timers at Hinterburg are required to go through. Something inevitably goes wrong. And so you, as you progress through the story, gain access to other areas with other dungeons. Each dungeon has very clearly marked skill level requirements. But of course, as with any game that is, this is an action RPG where you have overworld strong and heavy attacks. Each map, however, has its own magical abilities that are only accessible on that map. So in your initial opening map with dungeons, your two abilities are you have the ability to throw a spiked ball and chain, which you can then also retract, give you some kind of a range attack, but you can also drop a heavy ball, which you can make explode. There are puzzles inside of the
Okay.
dungeons themselves that require use of these two abilities.
Sure.
You can use these abilities in combat, of course, which they then cost MP, but your MP restores by using light and heavy attacks. Um, and more to your enjoyment, when you return to the hub city, which is Hinterburg itself, you have effectively downtime. So we have a very persona metaphor Atlas esque time progression
What?
where you have people that you can interact with in the city. And as you increase your bond levels with them, you acquire new abilities like another HP pip, another bit of MP that you can use, the ability to unlock locked chests. So you have options to interact with, I believe, 4 times 6, I believe 24 different village or different people who live or are visiting Hinterburg. which will change the way that you can progress through the story and the way that you can build yourself. And then, yes, of course, there's new weapons that you can buy. There's a bunch of new outfits that you can buy. There's armor. There's even magic charms, which increase the potency of certain things that you do. So, a pretty high degree of customizability based on the way that you choose to build and go through.
What was your go-to when you were playing? What kind of play
I
style
just want to
or
hit stuff. I want to hit stuff hard. I like swing big sword, do big numbers. You know this.
I do, but
You do. Swing big sword, do big numbers. But it's just a one-handed weapon. It's very simple combat. I would honestly call it more of a dumbed down, not to say that in a negative way, of course, but a dumbed down, simplified hybrid of your typical character action game mixed with Souls-like combat. So you have your dodge roll, of course, but your commands are very simple. You have your two abilities, which are on two separate buttons: light attack, heavy attack, dodge roll. That's it.
and is that almost sounds similar to Metaphor's overworld combat? Because that was light,
Not
heavy.
so much, not so much because that still took you to a turn-based series. Whereas
Sure.
in this case, you can see the enemies in the overworld, but as you approach, you get a barrier enclosed around you, and that is your
Oh.
battle arena, which you fight in.
So that's
Every
like that's like
Go
Tails,
ahead.
but without the extra abilities and arts and things,
Correct.
or like Magna Carta
That
2.
being said, all of the, as I understand it, and if if this is incorrect, by all means, I apologize, and someone's free to correct me. But I do believe all of the things that you fight are inspired by the lore of like mountain creatures in Austria. So the
Oh,
very first boss you fight in the tutorial dungeon is in fact a Krampus.
that's fun.
It's pretty fun. It's very simple, of course, because it's tutorial dungeon, but it's very compelling. I will say the way that the cell shaded, almost hand drawn watercolor art style is done is very captivating and pretty striking for this being this developer's first foray into making games. It is very well done, but the fact that there is both a time passing downtime mechanic, the ability to build bonds with villagers where there's actually payoff for doing so, and the game even encourages you via tutorial to build bonds with the characters that you personally find most interesting, which to me implies that it is impossible in the amount of time you have to fully build bonds with everybody. So therein lies variability and replayability
Sure.
in the way that you approach the game.
Do you have a character or a moment or an ability or a dungeon or anything that stood out to you when you were playing?
So I tried to kill two birds with one stone,
Naturally.
pun almost intended. And the first characters that I gravitated towards were two kids who live in Hinterburg, who, of course, being kids, were very upset that they no longer have any cell signal. But we're actually, as you are introduced to these characters, they're using magic to basically play their own version of Battleship, just like in front of them with a little magic board between the
That's
two of them.
fun.
It's pretty cool. And naturally, being kids, they're the curmudgeonly, oh, you're just trying to make your time in Hinterburg more unique, more realistic, to feel like you're immersing yourself in here, and people always come and go, blah blah blah. So they're the really, cynical outcast kids who, as you're gonna build bonds, will open up to you. They let you stick around, ask some questions, but they seem very, very over the tourism that comes to Hinterburg
Sure.
because it just disrupts their everyday life, and they don't get to be normal kids.
And the as far as the building the bond things go, like
Mhm.
what is it just talking to people? Do you have to like bring them things,
Oh
do
no.
side quests for them, or like how do you like what do you do to build it?
Talking primarily, but there are in fact gifts that you can purchase at varieties of stores inside of the town itself. And
Okay.
as you get to know them, you can discern what types of gifts they would like.
Oh, so you can give a gift that doesn't have as big of an impact on their
You can give them
bond meter or
gifts they
whatever.
outright dislike.
Oh. Oh, so you got to really think.
You do have to spend some time and consider. They're also not very cheap. So it's not things to just go and throw your hinterbucks around willy nilly.
Is that what they're called?
It sure is, baby.
I
So, and
love
they
that.
even go and explain that it is a specific currency that is only used in Hinterburg for the purposes of dungeon related activities. Because then they also say credit cards are also accepted at all restaurants. Because this is a space that is separate but exists inside of our world that is a vacation destination so that you can go and feel like a heroic adventurer on your own time.
That
Which,
almost
if
makes
that
me.
existed, I would be such a big, big proprietor of those establishments.
That
I
almost
would
makes me
spend so
think
much money.
of Westworld, right?
Almost. Almost.
Like obviously
Except
Westworld
that
is
is fully contained.
Westworld is also way more depraved than
Sure.
anything you've described.
But
But
that's also
you know,
fully contained, right? These are creations. These are supposed to be machines. These are simulations. No, no, no. In Dungeons of Hinterburg, these are actual monsters that you are actually fighting with actual risk.
that's yeah, that's another interesting thing. Although, yeah, if you've really thought about it, would you?
Absolutely.
No hesitation.
None. Exactly zero. Because then
Honestly,
at least if I was going to go down, at least I can go down while I can cast magic.
as a hero,
I don't even need to go down as a hero. I'll go down as a villain, but I can still cast magic.
that's fair. Honestly, I have to say I had my eyes on this at the I want to say it was a Game Awards where it was either a Game Awards or a State of Play. I don't think it was a direct. I cannot remember where I first saw this game revealed, but it looked cool. The art style immediately took to me, or I took to it. But I think the reason I didn't end up checking it out is because, well, one, there's just so much stuff to play, but I wasn't sure exactly what the game was going to be because of that first preview. I'm the kind of person that if I see a preview that interests me, I will make a note of it and I will kind of look out for things about it, but I don't normally watch trailers for games I know that I'm going to be interested in because I want to go in as blind as possible, but that kind of backfires sometimes because I end up just forgetting about it, really. And I think
Absolutely.
Dungeons of Hinterburg was one of those games that I kind of had an eye on, but then I kind of was like, I don't know. So would you
What I will
recommend?
say,
Oh, go ahead.
what I will say, because I have had a tendency, at least for these first few episodes, I watch the trailer that they have posted on the Games Pass store when you first click on any game. Even watching that, it doesn't really give you the feeling and impression of how the game truly is, which I think is brilliant.
Sure.
I think a trailer should be enough to get you a rough overview of what you're looking at and what you're doing, but I think the game should be able to stand on its own 2 feet. And honestly, for this being a first attempt at a game, I think it's wildly successful. Sure, we really could, if we really wanted to break down the minutia and get into it, we could easily just say that it's got really dumbed down, very simplistic combat. We could talk about the progression system is pretty simple. We can talk about how it doesn't do the bonds or the time passing mechanic as well, whereas it's just a derivative of any Persona game or metaphor. So I mean, we could talk about all of that, but for what this game is, it's it's good. It is
Especially as a
absolutely
first,
worth the time,
especially as a first attempt.
especially as a first attempt. I think that what this game is very true to itself, and the vision that they had for this game, at least from me as a consumer, I really think it's realized, and I find that there's an authenticity and almost an innocence to this game that you're not going to get from the AAA studio, because at the end of the day, it's a business venture. One, it's existing IPs. Two, and worst case scenario, it bombs. It's going to cost us a couple $100 million. We're just going to make it back with the next one. You can feel the development studio's passion for this project in this game.
I'm you've not only made me want to try it, you've made me excited for what this company could potentially do
On
going forward. If this is their first try, I mean,
honestly, yeah. I think if we can make combat a little bit more dynamic, and I think if we can make exploration feel a little bit more current gen, I honestly think that we should be talking about this game or this studio's games in the same potential type of conversation that we can have about a Breath of the Wild if they decide to delve into that scope, but just from a general how it makes you feel, how the world feels alive, how they're communicating their intentions to the players. I honestly think we could end up having those conversations.
nice. Now, obviously, we don't have insider knowledge, so this company could be made up of veteran developers. It probably is, but don't know any of their pedigree or anything. Same for Angel Matrix, but
Mhm.
if these games are both first attempts, this looks good for the rest of the industry. Honestly, I think the future is potentially double A. I mean, God forbid we dive into quadruple A territory like Ubisoft did, but I think yeah, this bodes well and has me excited for what's coming next. And
Speaking of,
oh,
what's coming next?
what
Perhaps we
is
should
coming
turn our
next?
attention to next week. So while we've already discussed that Avowed is coming out on Tuesday, which again, we will both be playing, but we want to get some comfortable time in so that we can have the types of conversations about this that we want to have. And we have to get our format together because obviously we're going to do an episode about it. It's going to be different, and we want that episode to really set the tone for some of these larger scale releases that we want to cover
Mm-hmm.
for games that we're both going to be playing to completion, probably in earnest. Anything that we're going to be willing and excited about dedicating 60 plus hours into, we want to be able to talk about to the effect that we are. So that is not what we are going to be discussing next week. Next week, I will be attempting to convince you all to play Eternal Strands by Yellow Brick Gaming. And
I
Ryan,
I will be convincing you all and Darren to try Lost in Random by Zoink.
which is either the most fun or most ridiculous name of a studio I've ever heard, but you know what? I hope it means something to him. Credit to him. If anyone from Zoink ever listens to this, hi. It's nice to meet you. Your studio is wild and I love the name just on principle.
And with that said, as always, we're 4 episodes in, 3 episodes of the actual show, and if you're here or you've come back, thank you, thank you times infinity. We don't know how to show appreciation for those who were listening that we know in person, our loved ones, if you're listening, people that we're acquainted with, people that have no idea who we are. Thank you to all of you for taking time out of your day to listen to two nerds try to convince each other to play games. If you would like to hear more, please follow us on all of our social medias. They're either on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube or any other platform. If you're listening, you can find us at Convince Me Media on YouTube and Instagram. We now have a TikTok, Convince Me Gaming. Our Spotify link is Convince Me Gaming. If you're listening there, then you already know. And with that said, please subscribe, follow, leave reviews, send in suggestions, and we will see you on the next episode. Are you convinced yet?